Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Bitcoin hitting $100,000 per coin, and Operation Chokepoint finally getting exposed into the mainstream consciousness. Very big week for us. Sam, how would you like to get started?
Huge week. Bitcoin at 100K is a massive milestone. It's hard to overstate just how big of a deal this is. I think every Bitcoiner in the world will remember where they were when Bitcoin hit 100K. I personally was on the phone with my fiance, and then she was explaining something, and I totally tuned out for 30 seconds because I said that Bitcoin hit 103. And I said, I'm sorry, I totally didn't hear the last 30 seconds of what you said because Bitcoin is above $100,000. She was understanding because she knows that Bitcoin's important to me. But this is huge news for our industry, and it's a vindication of the laser eyes out there. So for those who may not know, back in 2020 and 2021, a large segment of the Bitcoin population put laser eyes in their profile picture. The meme was laser eyes to $100,000. And when Bitcoin fell short of that goal, all of the laser eyes were mocked mercilessly. And so many of them actually changed their profile pictures. They removed the laser eyes in shame, except for one person, Michael J. Saylor. He was doing laser eyes before it was cool. He was doing it when it wasn't cool at all. And I think he'll keep doing it until it's passe. Let's pull up Michael J. Saylor's profile picture there. Michael Saylor with the laser eyes. He's always believed. He'll keep believing, one of the biggest believers in this space. And so we've got Michael Saylor. Finally, his laser eyes have come to pass. So have some of the hopes and dreams of many others in the industry. In addition to that, we have good old Peter Schiff getting dunked on endlessly on Twitter. This is Peter Schiff way back in 2019, 5 years ago, saying, keep dreaming. Bitcoin is never going to hit $100,000. Coincidentally, he had almost the exact same tweet about a year ago. Yet lo and behold, here we are, $100,000. And one of the best victory tweets of all came from our incoming president, Donald J. Trump. Let's pull that one up. Congratulations, Bitcoiners, $100,000. And the best part of all, you're welcome. Together we will make America great again. Oh man, that's one of his best. Brian, let's unpack this. What does 100K mean? Is Trump right to take credit? What do you think about everything that's happened in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, it's great. It's symbolic. It's a great, nice round number, a big, fat, beautiful one. And it's vindication for all the true believers who have been met with this relentless skepticism and naysaying for many years. You mentioned Peter Schiff. He is still melting down on Twitter, basically complaining that the only reason this happened was because of our advocacy efforts with government actors, and still poo-pooing it. He will just go down in infamy as just his name should be always wrong, Peter Schiff. So he will continue to do that. This is a great sign of momentum, of legitimacy, of celebration. And I think that President Trump is right to take a little bit of credit, because this bull run really got, the pedal went to the metal as soon as Donald Trump was elected, because we had such a clear contrast between the track record of the Biden administration, which is trying to put all Bitcoin businesses out of business for 4 years. And here comes Trump running for president, comes to the Bitcoin conference, says, I want the United States to be the Bitcoin superpower of the planet, really staking out that wedge issue and being a champion for Bitcoin. And when he won, the number started going up, and it's been going up ever since, because people are very optimistic that we're not going to have a government trying to handicap these assets constantly and trying to put the supporting businesses out of work. So this is huge news, really great moment. And I think the president is absolutely right to take a victory lap here, because he's brought a tremendous amount of optimism to this space.
Yeah. I had more optimism than I've seen in this space in years. It's great to see. And for those who think that Trump didn't have a part in this, just consider the counterfactual. Would we be at 100K today if Kamala Harris were the incoming president?
No
It's
way.
hard to imagine that scenario. I just can't see it, given the track record of the Biden administration when it came to all things crypto. So what's most interesting too is that A lot of the hype around Bitcoin, a lot of the excitement in the industry revolves around the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And a strategic Bitcoin reserve puts into play nation state game theory, where if the United States implements their own Bitcoin reserve, that puts a huge incentive for other countries to do the same. And there's subtle hints out there that other countries are thinking very seriously about Bitcoin right now. And one of those countries is actually one of our adversaries, Russia. So just yesterday, we found a video clip from President Vladimir Putin who's talking about the utility of Bitcoin on the global stage. Can you play that, Dylan?
Биткоин кто может запретить? Никто. А использование других, электронных средств, расчета кто может запретить? Никто, потому что это новые технологии. И чё бы ни было, чё бы ни происходило с долларом, эти инструменты так или иначе будут развиваться, потому что все будут стремиться к тому, чтобы, снижать издержки и повышать надежность.
Oh, so the audio, for those who couldn't hear, Putin is talking about Bitcoin and how it can't be banned, and how no matter what happens to the dollar, Bitcoin will always exist. It's almost like the cockroach of finance. You can't kill it, it will always survive any state ban. Any attempt to regulate Bitcoin is really futile because you can't ban it, it's decentralized. In addition to that, we had Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell yesterday. He came out and he made a very important point that Bitcoin is not a threat to the dollar, it's actually a threat to gold. Can you play that clip?
Or as a store of value, it's highly volatile. It's not a competitor for the dollar. It's really a competitor for gold. That's really how I think of it.
Great. So let's unpack both of these statements here. You've got Putin obviously thinking about Bitcoin. You have rising speculation in the markets that the United States might create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. In addition to that, you have Jay Powell embracing the idea of Bitcoin as digital gold, which only underscores the idea that if it is digital gold, why would the United States not accumulate it? Brian, to what extent do you think the recent price action is a reflection of the market pricing in the potential of a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Well, I think it's pricing in a renewed understanding of its scarcity and a renewed understanding that the demand is only going up. And when you have a supply cap and not really capped demand, that's a formula for the price going up. Putin's statement was very interesting. This comes on the heels of, in the last few months, we've seen statements out of Russia noting that they are mining Bitcoin. I think he was bragging about having Russia mined like 50,000 Bitcoin or something like that last year. So they are accumulating it. Of course, they want to accumulate a diversified set of assets to strengthen their position versus the United States. And before anybody starts calling us Putin apologists, we are not. We are pro America, but you need to listen when your adversaries are talking. And I think in this case, Putin seems to have reached an understanding faster than a lot of American politicians, and it would behoove us to catch up and really start fighting the fight that's happening, not the fight that we wish were happening. And so I think it would be a good idea for the United States to start accumulating Bitcoin. China, Russia, other adversaries of the US have typically been in the market for gold and other assets to try to strengthen their balance sheets. Now Russia in particular is bullish on Bitcoin. So I think the US needs to lead the way. We've got the most hash rate, we got the most miners on the planet here in the US now, and we are in a position to lead if we follow through. So I think President Trump seems prepared to do that and eager to do that. I think that's a very good sign for the strength of our country and for the Bitcoin network. In terms of Jay Powell, he still doesn't seem to get it totally. I'm encouraged that he at least sees the comparison to gold. That is, I think, a better place than he was in the past, but still saying people aren't using it as a store of value or as a means of transaction. I mean, he's just wrong. He's still wrong. People are doing that. The Lightning Network has created a pretty easy way to use it for transactions. And yes, people are using it as a savings instrument. It's not just speculators. So he's still pretty cynical and wrong, but at least he's in a better place today than he was months or years ago. And so that it is a significant step. But what I find even more significant is his continued level of ignorance on Bitcoin, but at least he's improving.
Yeah, like you said, it's a huge sign of progress from where he was previously. So we'll take the progress where we can get it. Brian, another thing I know you've spoken on in the past is the idea of nation state game theory with the strategic Bitcoin reserve. I remember at Bitcoin Nashville, you were asked a question about that. In what way would the US adopting Bitcoin as a reserve asset, how would that catalyze a Bitcoin space race in your view?
Yeah, it would, again, coming back to the scarcity, because there's only 21 million Bitcoin, there's only so many that will ever exist, but they will always exist because of this decentralized network. So the asset, as long as there's more people entering this world, then there will continue to be more demand for Bitcoin than there is supply. And that is why this theory of Bitcoin as an inflation hedge has always been pretty compelling. But if you're a country that has a tremendous amount of debt, you ought to be accumulating assets that will appreciate, hopefully, faster than your debt, or at least faster than most other assets you hold. So I think the more countries come to this realization, the more institutional and nation state demand you're going to see. And again, I come back to the fact that the United States is well positioned, as well as any country in the world, to be the leader here. The country owns over 200,000 Bitcoin. I think it's the largest nation state holder at this point. If it converts that to a strategic reserve, basically has a policy of never selling its Bitcoin, letting it appreciate, letting it strengthen the country's financial health, I think that is going to set off this, like you phrased it, it's going to set off the Bitcoin space race. And if the US does it, then pretty much every G7 and G20 is going to have to follow suit. Because as Satoshi said so many years ago, you might want to get some Bitcoin just in case it catches on. Well, it's caught on. It's at $100,000 a coin. The market cap is now, it's in the top 10 assets. I think it's number 7 right now. It's more valuable than silver. It's more valuable than Meta, which is one of the biggest companies on the planet. So it's caught on. We'll see which countries wake up and start participating in the space race. And I think if the US does it, everybody else will have to do it. And the US is really well positioned to be the leader here. So hopeful that that happens, maybe even 2025. Hope springs eternal. Hopefully that's what happens.
Yeah, fingers crossed on that one. And like you said, Brian, we are currently the indisputable leader in the world when it comes to Bitcoin, but there's no guarantee that we'll remain the leader, especially if we fail when it comes to energy policies. On that front, Brian, you and me, we published an op-ed this last week in Fox News that talks about the need to have an energy abundance mindset when it comes to energy policy. If you'd pull that up, Dylan, it's got this catchy headline, The Simple Solution to the Californication of American Energy Policy. So I think that meme, Californication, is the perfect metaphor for what Gavin Newsom has done to his own state when it comes to energy. Let's juxtapose the Newsom approach with the Trump approach. With Newsom, he's come forward and he's essentially said that there are good kinds of energy and bad kinds of energy. And that in the future, the only kinds of energy that Californians can use is the quote unquote good energy. In other words, renewables, hydro, wind, solar, and all of the bad energy, in other words, carbon, must be banned. And so that's had a really interesting impact on California that stands in stark contrast to Texas, for example. So, Brian, can you walk our listeners through the central ideas of this op ed and sort of compare and contrast California's policy versus Texas's and why one is better than the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, energy makes the world go round. This whole idea that's emerged in recent years, mostly from climate alarmists, that energy is bad, is frankly anti-human. Energy use is a sign of human flourishing. We all want clean air and we all want clean water. And at some point, hopefully, we will have ways of generating energy that are really for the environment 100% of the time. But there's a lot of hysteria about natural gas, which is very clean, a very clean source of energy. Hopefully, we'll have more nuclear in the future, whatever it may be. But the bottom line is the United States, in order to thrive, in order to compete, needs more power. And for the foreseeable future, it's still going to include a lot of fossil fuels. And we need to understand that and embrace that and make them in the cleanest way possible. Texas has done this. They have also, in addition to embracing the power generation side of things, because they know that our digital future will require it, they have also decided that they're not going to discriminate between end users of power and decide what is a good use or what is a bad use. When we hear this argument, a lot of times people will say, well, what is Bitcoin anyway? It's not really a good use of power. It's not worthwhile. They'll cite somebody like Jay Powell saying, oh, it's just a speculative asset. No, it is a monetary network that is decentralized, empowers the individual, and uses far less energy, by the way, than, for example, the traditional banking system. But this idea that you can just tell people, I don't like the way you're using electricity, is frankly authoritarian, borderline communist, is a terrible idea. And the way it's manifested in California is that they've essentially limited supply of power by saying you can only use this power, but not that power. They've been cutting off permits, for example, for natural gas hookups to various entities. And so he's limited the amount of power available artificially and did this electric vehicle mandate telling everybody they have to electrify their cars, thereby mandating the increase in demand. So he has limited supply and mandated the increase in demand. Well, guess what's happened? An unreliable grid with rolling blackouts and skyrocketing electricity bills that are hurting his people. Surprise, surprise, these policies are bad, terrible, misguided, whatever word you want to use. And Texas is all of the above approach of if you can bring us power, come on in. And if you want to use it to create jobs and human flourishing, great. So it's this abundance mindset in Texas. We want abundant power for abundant jobs and an abundant economy versus California, which is no, no, no. We're going to limit which electricity sources you can use, and we're going to limit the different ways you can use it. This kind of micromanaging attitude. We see this stark contrast, and guess what the result has been? The number one migration pattern of state to state movement has been from California, away from California, and to Texas. And that is according to Census Bureau data. We didn't just make that up. It's maybe not entirely because of energy. Taxes and other things probably play a role, but this is just such an important issue. And President Trump hits on it constantly that if you don't have cheap, abundant energy, you're not going to have a thriving economy. And we actually have a case study to look at, and it's Texas on the good side, California on the bad side. We know how this movie goes. We have seen it before. And so I think Trump's energy abundance agenda, seeking energy dominance, is exactly the right way to think about this issue. We need it for Bitcoin mining, but we also need it for AI, high performance computing, all sorts of different things that are going to be critical for the US to compete with China and other hostile actors around the world. So abundance good, scarcity bad. That's the way we should think about it.
Yeah. Can you pull up the graphic of the two juxtaposed against each other again, Dylan? I just love what Fox News chose for our headline picture because it's essentially asking the question, which way, Western man? Do you want to go with Newsom looking like a sleazeball or Trump looking like a freshly tanned visionary? I think obviously there's some editorializing in those photo selections, but the point still stands. One of those approaches leads to literal darkness in some cases. You mentioned the rolling blackouts, and the other abundance mindset leads to more light, more energy, more electricity for everybody. And Brian, I think perhaps the greatest irony of all is which state has the cleanest energy mix in the country? It's Texas. It's not California, it's Texas. And in addition to that, Texas also has the cheapest energy. So if someone really cares about clean energy, then arguably the abundance approach of saying all of the above, we want hydro, wind, solar, but also carbons, is the best way to go. And I think that's what's missing in California is this recognition that maybe your policies make you feel good and like you're doing good for the environment, but at the end of the day, you've got Texas beating you by a mile with cleaner energy mixes and much cheaper energy. Gasoline in Texas is in California is more than 50% more expensive than it is in the rest of the country. A USC professor came out this last month and he said that the average Californian will have to pay about $1,000 more just for gas because of new regulations that Newsom has imposed on the industry. It's absolutely tragic what he's doing to his state, what he's doing to the average Californian there. And it's not helping the environment in the same way that Texas is by, like you said, not discriminating against end users, for example, because Bitcoin miners like us are flocking to the state and AI data centers are moving there in droves. You have much more incentive for energy generation. And because Bitcoin miners like us are able to use energy when nobody else wants it, we're providing a guaranteed client to all of these renewable energy providers like wind and solar who don't have a client in the middle of the day when nobody needs energy. And so the road to hell was paved with good intentions. And I think Newsom is the one dumping the concrete in California. Whereas if you just have a pragmatic approach like Greg Abbott is in Texas, it's a completely different outcome that actually is better for the environment and better for the consumer at the end of the day. So there's a lot of messaging there, Brian, that, you know, we had a dinner the other night with Senator Daines where he talked about the importance of having an abundance mindset when it comes to energy. Hopefully we can get more Democrats on board with this idea too. And I think we can when they recognize that the end results of an abundance mindset actually are a cleaner energy mix for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I mean, I almost ripped your arm out of the socket when we were chatting with him and he said that's why we need an abundance mindset, not this scarcity mindset. And that was before our op-ed was even published. And I was just so, floored by that and so excited to hear a US senator say that. It shows that there are some elected officials out there who get it. As you said, Governor Abbott gets it, that you can have the cleanest energy mix in the country and the most abundant energy in the country and some of the cheapest energy in the country. And that is going to drive our economy forward. It is going to make people wealthier, healthier, and better off overall. And it'll help a lot of new businesses of the future to thrive. So President Trump seems to be following the Texas model, jettisoning the California model. That is the right way to go. And I think we have a bright future because of it.
Yeah, well said. Brian, one of the main points of value that we try to give to our listeners on this show is being ahead of the curve, whether that's with energy policy and this energy abundance mindset or with the debanking scandal. That's another area where, I know you've been talking about debanking for years, well before we even started this podcast, and what an issue this is. And it seems like just recently, this issue of debanking, this massive scandal, is just finally starting to enter into the normie consciousness. That's in large part thanks to a Joe Rogan episode last week where Mark Andreessen talked about debanking and just how much it's hurt people in the tech sector. Do you mind playing that clip, Dylan?
Debanking is when you as either a person or your company are literally kicked out of the banking system.
Like they did to Kanye.
Exactly. Like they did to Kanye. My partner Ben's father has been debanked.
Really?
We had an employee who...
For what?
For having the wrong politics, for saying unacceptable things. Under current banking regulations, here's a great thing. Under current banking regulations, after all the reforms of the last 20 years, there's now a category called a politically exposed person, PEP. And if you are a PEP, you are required by financial regulators to kick them off to kick them out of your bank.
What?
You're not allowed to have
What if you're politically on the left?
That's fine because they're not politically exposed.
So no one on the left gets debanked?
I have not heard of a single instance of anybody on the left getting debanked.
Can you tell me what the person that did? What they said that got them debanked?
Oh, well, I mean, David Horowitz is a right wing, he's pro-Trump. I mean, he said all kinds of things. He's been very anti-Islamic terrorism. He's been very worried about migration, all these things.
And they debanked him for that.
Yeah, they debanked him. So you get kicked out of your bank account. You get kicked out of you can't do credit card transactions. By the way, you can't run.
How is that legal?
Well, exactly. So.
Yeah, how is that legal? That's one of the biggest questions. And it is a serious issue, the debanking or the deplatforming of people who have opinions and ideas that run counter to the mainstream. That's why, Brian, you and I film our podcast with Rumble. Rumble is one of the few companies out there who recognized that YouTube was deplatforming people. And so it filled the niche and kind of offered a haven for people who were being deplatformed by the establishment. You see the exact same dynamic at play within the banking industry too. And I know it's something, Brian, that you've been raising the alarm on for a long time. Andreessen, is he exaggerating in this clip, or is his explanation of debanking about what you've seen in your experience as well?
No, very similar. I think the only critical difference is he mentioned the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is basically Elizabeth Warren's little slush fund to go around harassing people. But we found debanking originated more from the Fed, the OCC, and the FDIC. But the principle is the same, that it's been political targeting and eliminating, access to the financial system for political reasons. It's completely outrageous. And, he cited the politically exposed person issue. There was a sneakier, arguably even more nefarious, maybe equally nefarious way that they're going about this. So Marty Grunberg, the outgoing chairman of the FDIC, back in the Obama administration, had sort of launched this crusade against gun companies, payday lenders, other businesses that he didn't like. And basically, with winks and nods and regulation by, I don't know, subterfuge, basically said to banks that it would be a shame, you got a nice bank there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it at your next examination by your regulators. We don't really like these businesses. You might want to kick them out. And so that started happening. It was exposed. There was a lawsuit. When he was replaced under President Trump the first time, Yelena McWilliams came in, did an investigation, found that yes, that was happening. And yes, it was illegal and unconstitutional. And so they basically apologized for it. But then fast forward to President Biden coming in. Guess who's back as chairman of the FDIC? Dirty Marty, as he's referred to by our friend Nick Carter. And they started doing the same thing, and this time including tech companies and anybody related to the digital asset industry. They're even more brazen, though. They issued a joint statement from the bank regulators in January of 2023, maybe, or thereabouts, basically saying that they saw threats to the safety and soundness of the financial system. Can you think of a more nebulous word salad than, well, safety and soundness? And basically saying if you have bank accounts for companies like that, then you are not going to do well. The insinuation is you're not going to do well on your bank examination. So you really ought to get these banks out of there. They proceeded to, according to Democrat Barney Frank, assassinate various crypto banks during when there was stress on sort of mid-tier banks in the last couple of years. And even solvent banks were seized by regulators if they were known to be doing business with digital asset companies. This was absolutely a mafioso style political hit on customers that this administration didn't like for their political beliefs or because they thought their business model threatened legacy institutions, whatever it may be. But it is outrageous that it's been allowed to happen. We've been talking about it for a while. Glad that it's finally getting some mainstream attention. Great credit to Joe Rogan and Mark Andreessen for bringing this into the mainstream of thought. And now we've seen Congressman French Hill, who's the current chairman of the House Digital Asset Subcommittee, saying that in the next Congress, he wants to do a full accounting of this. He wants to have an investigation. He wants to understand who the bad actors have been and how they've been behaving badly. And there you go. There's a tweet from French, an excellent member of Congress. And he points out that this is absolutely, I think it's un-American what they've done. So I'm very glad to see an influential member. He has a chance of becoming the chairman of the Financial Services Committee in the House. I think that's a competitive race, so we don't know if he'll get that or not. But whether he does or not, he'll be an influential member of the committee. And I look forward to potentially talking to them, explaining some of the experiences that companies in our space have had, so that they understand where to go find those buried bodies and make sure that this doesn't happen again. I think we need legislation to ensure that there is not political discrimination in banking, so that this doesn't just depend on, the whipsaw of one election to another. There needs to be legislation on it, but there was already a lawsuit and found that it's unconstitutional behavior. They were doing it anyway, which is shocking. But I think there needs to be a public shaming, a public accounting, and then hopefully legislation to prevent it from ever happening again, because people should not be debanked because of wrongthink, if you want to call it that. The most prominent example I think that people usually think of is the Canadian truckers. When the truckers staged a protest because they didn't like Trudeau's vaccine mandates during COVID, they were not in favor of those. They wanted the freedom to choose whether or not to be vaccinated. You wouldn't think that's too controversial a position, but they started to get debanked. And then when people were donating to their cause because they agreed with their protests through GoFundMe or other sort of crowdsourcing means, those platforms started to get cut off, and those funds started to be seized, and donors started to get targeted. So just to the north, we saw it. We saw other examples in the U.S. of Trump supporters getting, having their accounts closed. Andreessen cited the Horowitz example in that interview, but there are many other. I mean, he's a pretty famous guy. Horowitz is. So just imagine a less famous, less influential person. They have no power to fight back against their government who is discriminating against them for political reasons. So this is a huge scandal. It needs to be thoroughly exposed. I'm glad that we seem to be on the path towards doing that, and it needs to be prevented from ever happening again. So, but the mainstream media has not really even touched this at all. They've treated it like a conspiracy theory that wasn't really happening. Meanwhile, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of public examples of it happening. The fact that they haven't touched it just further shows how irrelevant they're becoming, because this is such an important issue that's affecting so many people, and yet they just shrug and don't pay attention. If it were happening to Democrats, they'd probably pay attention, but not when it happens to conservatives. Totally crazy. And Andreessen is not exactly a right-wing nut job, by the way. He was a Democrat from California supporting Obama and Hillary Clinton, and has sort of been radicalized to the right in recent years because the Biden administration was trying to put all his businesses under. I mean, you want to make somebody switch parties, tell them that they're not allowed to do what they truly believe is making the world better. And all of a sudden, they created a whole bunch of really powerful Republicans just by governing badly and corruptly. Anyway, end of rant. But Operation Chokepoint 2.0, un-American, unconstitutional, downright evil, and thank God it's getting exposed. Let's prevent it from ever happening again.
Yeah, amen to that. Brian, you mentioned the mainstream media failing to cover this at all. If it weren't for the dogged reporting of Nick Carter, who isn't technically even a journalist, he's a VC, people wouldn't even know about Operation Chokepoint 2.0. Nick Carter published, I think, 3 different stories over the years in Pirate Wires, which is a lesser known but extremely high quality tech journal that detailed everything that happened with Operation Chokepoint 2.0 and all the behind the scenes there. But when you do a Google search for this idea of debanking, you get almost nothing. Let's pull that up. Yeah, thank you, Dylan. So The Economist points out in their headline, MAGA types have a point on debanking. And yeah, we've always had a point on debanking. This article was published today. We've had a point on debanking for the last several years. In addition to that, in those search results, you don't see any ABC, you don't see any New York Times, you don't see any Washington Post. They're not even talking about these issues. And it's not just companies that are being debanked, it's individuals as well. Melania Trump revealed in her recent memoir that not only was she debanked, but her son was as well. So they're targeting individual members of the Trump family. Anybody who has any opinion that runs counter to the mainstream could potentially be at risk in this kind of situation unless something is changed. And so, Brian, I'm curious about the mainstream media's negligence when it comes to debanking. How is that even possible? Why? Why is it that they completely ignore this and look the other way for several years?
Because they agree with it, unfortunately. And I will make one minor correction to your assessment. That's right. I mean, ABC, NBC, CBS, Washington Post, a lot of your typical mainstreamers have not even touched this issue, even though they've been pitched on it by many people. They've just kind of shrugged it off as some conspiracy, even though it's real, because they have no problem with people who don't share their political beliefs being discriminated against. The only correction I would make is that the New York Times did pick up on Operation Chokepoint way back when the Obama administration was doing it, and they agreed with it. They wrote about how it's good that the businesses that they, in their ivory tower of the New York Times, don't like, they're fine with them being kicked out of their bank account. How outrageous. They never think about what if the shoe were on the other foot. It shouldn't be, but it shouldn't be on the current foot either. So it's just they will never speak up if the people that they don't like are the ones being mistreated. And it is hypocritical. It's disgusting. But this is the world we live in. And that's why it's so important that Elon bought Twitter and that Rumble exists and these other platforms so that people can actually have their voices heard and identify these abuses and actually fight back. Under the old Twitter, I mean, this would have been censored, immediately. Even on YouTube, I remember working for a candidate who published an ad in 2022 railing against big tech censorship of his messages. He wanted border security, um, some very mainstream kind of Republican ideals, and said that look, big tech censoring us is hurting our campaign. And Google censored his ad about Google's censorship
Oh
because
my
it was
gosh.
on YouTube. And it was taken down from YouTube. So this is a real problem. Discrimination against people for political purposes. In the banking system, it's horrible. In big tech, it's horrible. In really any context, we need free speech in this country. President Trump's video that he put out about trying to dismantle the censorship industrial complex, I think, was very welcome. We have to have a level playing field in the marketplace of ideas, or else America's finished as an idea, as an experiment, as this great shining city on a hill. So glad Choke Point's out there in spite of the mainstream media's silence on it. And in fact, I think the fact that this is becoming a real mainstream issue in spite of them not talking about it, I think just, further shows how much trust in them is eroding. And it's because they've earned it, because they are not talking about issues like this that are really, really important to people. So I don't know. That's my assessment. I just think they're not talking about it because they don't care about the people who are being hurt. They don't view them as on their team. And that's really sad and unfortunate. And I hope they wake up and stop behaving this way.
Yeah, it's unfortunate the extent to which legacy media has become almost indistinguishable from state media in the past several years. They've essentially become an American Pravda. And now, because of Twitter, because of Substack, because of podcasts, all these new forms of media, they're being exposed for their biases, for their corruption in a lot of ways. It's unfortunate. Also worth noting, debanking underscores the importance of Bitcoin. If you hold a self-bearing instrument asset like Bitcoin, where you can become your own bank, you don't have to worry about getting debanked. However, it's also one of the reasons why I think a lot of those banks that service crypto customers and clients were targeted, is because even if you hold Bitcoin, every now and then you need an off ramp into fiat, and the traditional banks supply that. And so it was just a government bureaucrats' attempt to try to choke off Bitcoin. The name Chokepoint is perfectly fitting. Choke off Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency to make it less of a threat to the establishment system. It's unfortunate, but thank heavens it's being exposed by Mark Andreessen, by Nick Carter, by others who are ringing the alarm on this. Hopefully, with French Hill's investigation, we'll be able to see the full extent to which government bureaucrats abuse their power and acted like mafia bosses, like you mentioned, Brian. So speaking of, oh yeah, go ahead.
Forget the other choke point, which we had to defeat in court this year, which was that they tried to execute an Operation Chokepoint on our access to electricity. We had that lengthy discussion of our op-ed about how energy abundance is important. I was remiss in not mentioning that we had to sue the Biden administration, the Energy Department, because they essentially tried to create a registry of Bitcoin miners with, according to a White House statement, designs on limiting or eliminating this industry from the United States. It is so insanely corrupt and bad. They were literally trying to put an industry out of business because they didn't like it, because they saw it as a threat to their own power. That's the truth. And the same principle applies to choke point in banking as it does in this electricity case and as it does in censorship. So anyway, I just wanted to include that because they are not just trying to execute a choke point on our freedom of speech and our freedom of our financial freedom, but also on our access to energy, which makes the whole world go around. So really, really scary stuff. And I think that's why you saw so many moderates and Democrats actually crossing the aisle to change the regime here in the US.
Yeah, they saw the corruption. And interestingly, with Operation Chokepoint 3.0, as with Operation Chokepoint 2.0, who was the puppet master pulling the strings the whole time? None other than Elizabeth Warren. She is one of the greatest enemies, not only to Bitcoin, but frankly to freedom of association and freedom of business in America. So I'm heartened to see that America heartily rejected the Elizabeth Warren regime. As we all know, Elizabeth Warren's acolytes staffed the administration and were pretty critical to going after Bitcoin and other companies within the cryptocurrency industry. So thank heavens that there has been a referendum against that style of politics and doing government. That being said, hypocrisy abounds. It will always abound in politics, and we saw it more clearly than we ever have in a long time over the last few days. As many of our listeners know, President Biden promised the American people that he would not pardon his son, Hunter Biden. In addition to that, all of his allies in the media said that the idea of Biden pardoning Hunter was an impossibility. It wouldn't happen. Let's play a quick clip of that.
Letting the world know that he will not wipe away the decision of 12 of his son's peers was asked directly, and he has said he wouldn't pardon his son if he gets convicted.
Let's wait and see what happens if he loses.
Yeah, but he said it.
He's going to get pardoned by his dad. There's no question about that.
The president has ruled out pardoning his son.
Major commitment from the president, accepting the outcome of the trial and also pledging not to.
Classic. So, Brian, as pretty much all of America knows by this point, Hunter Biden profited significantly from trading off of his family name. And in addition to that, he committed several felonies, which include lying on a federal background check and possession of a firearm while he was doing drugs, illicit drugs. So Hunter Biden is the ultimate degenerate, with all respect to Hunter Biden and his family. I don't know if they merit respect, but this is just so frustrating to see that someone who is living well outside the bounds of the law, it doesn't matter because he's the president's son. And on the flip side, let's take a look at everything that's happened to the Trump family and the Trump team over the last several years. Let's start with Trump's mugshot. As we know, Trump has been the target of political prosecution on so many different fronts. It's difficult to even keep track of how many cases have been brought against him and how many of these charges have been completely trumped up. And the American people saw through that. That's why they listed a concern for democracy as one of the reasons they voted for Trump, because they saw the political targeting of the former president. In addition to that, of course, we have Trump's former aide, Steve Bannon. He was sent to jail for contempt of Congress. Here's him coming out of prison right there in sweatpants. And then, of course, we have Peter Navarro, who has been in this Rumble studio before, talking about, what he's going to do to advance the Trump agenda. He was also sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress. So you see all this political targeting, no immunity for it whatsoever. And then on the other side of things, though, you have President Biden pardoning his son Hunter after he committed a whole slew of crimes, many of which we might not even know about it. The Hunter laptop is a cesspool of degeneracy and criminality. So, Brian, what do you make of the pardon saga? Are you surprised this happened? And what does this say about the state of our legal system here in the United States?
Well, I'm not surprised. I have long thought from the beginning of this saga that Hunter was going to get a pardon from his dad. What galled me was the constant lying about it and saying, no, this will never happen. Of course it was going to happen. But the two-tiered system of justice is unbelievable. Trump, of course, was prosecuted and sued for things that no one in America would have been targeted for if he weren't Donald Trump. I mean, that is like the antithesis of equal justice under law, which is the phrase at the entrance to the U.S. Supreme Court. You had Bannon and Navarro prosecuted for contempt of Congress. Meanwhile, you had Eric Holder, Obama's attorney general, cited for contempt of Congress, never prosecuted, of course, because it was a Democratic attorney general. This notion, I mean, Hunter, let's think about the laptop for a second, okay? He was on film doing illegal drugs, engaging in prostitution. We had business deals suggesting illegal foreign lobbying. There are whistleblowers showing that he ended up paying a big tax bill because he evaded millions of dollars in taxes. Of course, lied on a gun form to acquire a firearm illegally. I mean, this list of felonies that he allegedly, but we're pretty sure he committed, would have anyone else behind bars for an extended stay, probably decades. And yet he is flying around on Air Force One, spending nights in the White House with his dad, hobnobbing with the high and mighty. This is the ultimate poster child for injustice, for a two-tiered system of justice in the US. The fact that Biden pardoned him not just for the crimes that the jury voted to convict him on, but for any crimes since 2014, that President Biden knew exactly how far back he should go and start that clock on the pardon. I wonder what went into that. That seems awfully precise, doesn't it? This is such a crock of BS. But again, I kind of knew it would happen. It doesn't mean I supported the idea. I kind of figured, look, it's his son. He'll probably pardon him, even though he doesn't really deserve it. But the constant gaslighting over the last, however many months or years is really offensive. And I think the spokespeople and media apparatus that went along with this absolute charade deserve the embarrassment that they are experiencing right now. Hopefully, again, hopefully this Justice Department will be cleaned out and cleaned up and return to a place where it actually is administering justice fairly. To do that, there has to be accountability. You have to get rid of the bad actors. Now, that, of course, will be framed by these same idiots who said there'll never be a Hunter pardon. That'll be framed as retribution. Well, there is a difference between retribution and accountability. There has to be accountability so that people will have faith in our justice system, that it is evenly and fairly administered. And to do that, you have to get rid of the bad actors who have been unfair. So this will be an interesting battle in the months to come, but hopefully, the side of justice will win out.
Yeah, and Brian, you mentioned that the pardon extends all the way back to 2014, a very specific date. If I'm not mistaken, 2014 was also the same year that Hunter Biden was named to the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, for which he had zero qualifications whatsoever. So again, a very conspicuous date, a very strange pardon. I think it is a sign of deeper corruption, which is extremely unfortunate. And I think Vivek had a really interesting point too in calling the Hunter Biden trial a smokescreen. As he tweeted back in June, and even before that, he was talking about this. He said, "The Hunter Biden trial is a smokescreen. It's designed to make the prosecution of Trump appear nonpartisan, yet the outcome of the Hunter trial doesn't matter because Joe Biden can and will pardon him. The trial's timing is no coincidence." Brian, what do you make of this idea that it potentially was a smokescreen all along?
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't shock me. I think the prosecutor on the case has been railing against the pardon, and he was all upset about it. But look at the pattern of conduct from Merrick Garland's DOJ. I mean, this has been the most politicized Department of Justice maybe ever. They were going after parents at school board meetings. They were going after pro-lifers who were praying outside abortion clinics. I mean, it seems like anybody who is a political opponent was a target. So this idea of creating the smokescreen to give themselves a talking point and give the media something to point to say, oh no, we're doing everything fairly. I mean, would that shock you? It wouldn't shock me. I don't know if it's correct, but just looking at the pattern of behavior, it sure seems like something that could be true.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I shudder to think that Merrick Garland was almost on the Supreme Court. Some people may forget that he was actually Obama's nominee to fill Scalia's spot back in the day, but the Senate stopped that from happening. And they received a lot of pushback for doing that. But now seeing how Merrick Garland has conducted himself and led the agency that he oversees, I'm very encouraged that he never sat on the highest court in the land. That's I think good news for America. So it's unfortunate to see that kind of corruption, but again, that's the whole point of the incoming Trump presidency, is to root out that corruption that has beset our federal government, to try to put our government on the correct course, whether that be through DOJ or new appointments that are being made, the whole object of the Trump presidency is to make our bureaucracy so it is again in service to the people. Trump is not a threat to democracy, he's a threat to bureaucracy. And those who say he's a threat to the former are actually the very bureaucrats or people aligned with the bureaucracy who benefit from its interests. So it's something important for our listeners to keep in mind. You know, Brian, we covered a lot of ground today. Bitcoin at 100K, Trump pardons, debanking, energy abundance. Is there anything you think we should touch on before we come to a close here?
Just to celebrate, as Trump said, you're welcome. $100,000 Bitcoin is a great moment to celebrate our op-ed being published, celebrating energy abundance, another awesome moment to celebrate, and some really deeply held corruption in the federal government with Operation Chokepoint being exposed. It feels like it's a dawn of a new day, a sea change for the better, and our country is going to be better off. So this is a day of celebration, and thank you everybody for tuning in and joining us. And we will see you next time on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod.